Today on Energy Contact, most of what we think are today's thoughts and decisions were in fact formed years ago. Those thoughts and decisions shaped our physical body. They shaped us then, and they're still shaping us now. Well, today we're about to see how the intellect in your body is at least as smart as the intellect in your brain. And that body intellect knows how to put you in touch with your health, growth, self-improvement, and happiness. Curious? Well, then sit your smart body down for a few minutes, because it's all coming up right now on Energy Contact.
I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping and now keep my mind on better things. I ain't gonna worry and I ain't gonna complain. I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping and now keep my mind on better things.
Hello, and welcome to Energy Contact. My name is Joseph Willenbrink. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you to the production staff here in the studio for helping me get my message out to you. Energy Contact is a series that I'm presenting to you as a public service. It's about attaining perfect health, growth, self-improvement, happiness, and realizing your full potential. It's designed to present you a new way of seeing yourself and a new way of seeing the world around you. We're talking about things that have to do with making an energetic contact with yourself internally and with your environment. There's no difference between the body, the mind, the spirit, the emotion, the intellect, the ego. There's no difference between mass and energy. There is just something about us that loves to separate, to categorize, to classify, to dissect, pull these things apart. But there's no difference. In fact, all that health and healing and self-improvement we're looking at take place when we do just the opposite, when we put these things together. When we make an energetic contact between the physical world and the unseen one. We're presenting on these programs a brand new paradigm that's thousands of years old. We're presenting extraordinary topics for ordinary people. Let's move right ahead with that, and let's bring up our first slide. Everyone please know that I'm not a doctor. I don't want to be a doctor, and this show is in no way a medical advice show. If you're looking for medical advice, you're in the wrong place. That's not what we're doing here. Now, I call myself an energy healer or a chakra healer. A lot of people call themselves a lot of things, but it's important to realize that state, federal, and local governments call me no such thing at all. There's a lot of important information on this slide. We're going to leave it up there for a second, and I will invite and encourage you to read it thoroughly, if you will. And when you've got it down, now would be a great time to locate a pencil and paper. And here's why you want to do that. At the end of this show, we're going to run some contact information on the credits, and you'll be able to get in touch with me if you choose. As a matter of fact, I'm sort of hoping that there might be something that I'll tell you today that might inspire you to want to contact me. I'll be glad to hear from you. But in order to contact me, you're going to need that contact information. And in order to get that, you're going to need a pencil and paper. There'll be plenty of time to jot it down at the end of the show, if your pencil and paper are ready. All right, let's come back up here. Today's show is show number 7. And if you're tuning in for the first time today, well, thank you. Thanks and welcome. I think you'll enjoy the show. These shows are sequential. They build, so there's some ramp-up time, some up-to-speed stuff that you will have missed out on. However, I'm doing my very best to make each show have a lot of value on a standalone basis, and I believe today's show really does. So, if it is your first time, and if what you see piques your interest, then I'll invite you to look for earlier shows. They'll be airing at later times. They'll either be re-airing here on this channel or perhaps at different times and days in different areas where your friends live. And if you look for them, I'll appreciate it. All right, and now we've come to the part of the show where I'm going to introduce my co-host to you. Let's get Slim on camera. This is my buddy Slim here. And Slim is here for a purpose. Since we're investigating what energy contacts in the physical self, we have to know a couple of things, don't we? We have to know something about energy. It's a good thing to know about. But all of that energy out there somewhere does us no good whatsoever. It does us no good until we bring it into contact with something. Slim is here to show us that thing that the energy contacts. Remember, a body without energy is just a corpse. And energy without a body might be a number of awesome things, but none of them are human. All right, so we're moving forward today. Previously on Energy Contact, we have talked about how thought creates form and how the tools that it uses are the internal forces that animate us: breath, frequency, pulse, rhythm, wave, constant motion. Those things combined with the external forces, gravity and entropy, the bumps and bruises, the kisses and hugs of life. And all those things are acting and reacting and interacting and iterating, the external forces and the internal forces, forming us all the time, forming us right now. We have seen on Energy Contact that there's absolutely no difference between mass and energy. That like ice and water and steam, they're all the exact same thing in different forms. We might experience them differently. We might see them as different things, but in fact, they're exactly the same. So this physical body here is just frozen energy, just like ice is frozen steam. From there, we looked at atoms and cells and saw that our physical self is basically just nothing. And from there, we saw how we took that nothing and began our self-building process in the womb. We saw how just after conception, all of our cells were in direct physical contact, and that the cells that went to our head and the cells that went to our toes were all the same. Also, we saw that we are mystical creatures, at least as much as we are scientific ones. And that's part of the reason why doctors can't figure us out, why medicine hasn't found a way to systematically fix everything. I mean, if we were machines, if we were scientific things, they'd figure it out. You know, for example, cars are machines. They can fix cars. And if you learn how to fix one car, you can pretty much fix them all. We're not like that. One pill that makes one person gets better makes another person get sick. And nobody knows who's who until you take the pills. All right, that leads us right into today. So if we are not medically viable creatures, well, what are we then? How can we understand ourselves enough to unlock the secrets to our health and growth and self-improvement? Well, today we're going to go right back to where we were the last show, right back to our first days of existence after conception, right back to the womb. And today we are going to do something very important. We are going to meet the body intellect and the anatomy that it builds. We're going to see how the same material in our brains that give us intelligence, that give us intellect, thought, reason, logic, all those things we think of as brain functions, how they are in fact in every cell of our body. We're going to see how that body intellect builds us. So our body thinks, and that's important to know, because if our body thinks in uneven ways, or sick ways, or cynical ways, or angry ways, then we become uneven, or sick, or cynical, or angry. But if our body thinks in positive and healthy and peaceful and loving ways, then we become positive and healthy. We become peaceful and loving. And the list goes on. But it's your body. It's in your body where it happens. Why do you want to know all this? Well, because we've had it upside down and backwards for years, all our lives, and longer than that. We've always thought that it was random, chance, that our health was something from the outside of us. And that thought is what has set us up. When we become aware of that body intellect, when we really, really understand it, we'll be empowered to rebuild ourselves. This time to our specifications, to the way we want to be. All right, so that's where we're headed today. But before we go there, first, take a deep breath, sit back and relax. Close your eyes if you can, because we have arrived at the point of the show where we get to take our virtual field trip, our journey in our mind's eye. Today for our virtual field trip, we are going to Venice Beach, my favorite place in the world, my home, my living laboratory. But even though we're going to Venice, we're going to have, our field trip's not going to be so much fun today. As you know, not all of our field trips are fun and games. And today's is going to be a little disturbing. You'll recall a couple of episodes ago, we saw an automobile wreck. Well, today, we're going to see a bicycle accident. Are you ready? If you remember that bicycle path on Venice Beach, if you've ever seen it, it's a great thing. But it goes right through the sand. And sand on top of concrete is very slippery for bicycle tires. And the path curves. So here we are walking down Venice Beach. and we look over, and there's a pregnant woman, let's say about 7 months pregnant, and she's going at a pretty good clip on a bicycle, and she goes around one of those curves on the path, and those tires do slip in some sand, and she takes a spill. And it's a good spill too. Now, she's not seriously hurt. Nobody's getting hurt today on Energy Contact. But she takes a good jolt, and she lands on her hands and knees and slides. And you know what else? She lands on her belly. She gets up, and like I said, not seriously hurt, not hospital hurt, but she's dazed. And you look, and her knees are scraped up, and her elbows scraped up, and her belly hit. All right. So when Mama fell off that bike, we know who fell with her, huh? Well, Baby did, of course. But unlike Mama, when Baby fell, he didn't know he was going to fall. He didn't have a chance to brace himself for the blow. So, do you think Baby was traumatized by that? I do. Do you think he'll remember it? Well, cognitively, no, he almost certainly will not. But at a body intellect level, he's going to remember it very clearly. And that's what our show is about today. Now we're going to fast forward, time travel about 40 years into the future. Baby's an adult now. And just maybe, Baby's got some troubles. He might have nightmares. But all the psychiatrists in the world won't be able to figure out why. Or maybe he has problems, irrational fears, they think, about the sudden onset of traumas. And they call him irrational. But given what you and I know about him, maybe they're not so irrational at all. He might get chronic headaches, he might get colitis, he might get pain syndromes, all sorts of things that all the smart medical doctors in the world don't know how to fix. And so what do? Well, they just give him pills. And now, all of a sudden, he's got other emotional and physical side effects, and addictive ones. And so there he is. He's on the hamster wheel. People will blame it on genetics. They'll blame it on childhood fears, but they won't go back to the source. They won't know where it came from. Hold that thought. All right, we're going to go right back to the beginning today. We're going to do some quick review here, and we're going to start tiny and build up. We looked at atoms, and we saw that atoms are all the same. Your atoms are the same as my atoms. A carbon atom in you is the same as a carbon atom in me, the same as a carbon atom in a puppy, in a puddle of gasoline, a lump of coal, a diamond, anything. They're identical, they're interchangeable, they're indistinguishable. But then we looked at cells, and we saw that cells are different. They're alive. They all have individuality. Like snowflakes, no two are exactly alike. We saw that we each have about 10 trillion cells in us, and that we each have 7,000 trillion atoms in us. These are big numbers, too big to fathom. As a matter of fact, if you do the math, that equates out to about 700 trillion atoms per cell. Whoa, give or take a billion or two. Now, the physicist says we're all made up of atoms. The biologist says we're all made up of cells. So who's right? Well, they both are. Cells are made up of atoms, and we are made up of the aggregate. But what's interesting about that is that what that means is that somehow, some way, somewhere along the line, identical things got together and somehow created different things. They created things that were unique. They created individuality. We're interested in that today. All right. So let's hop right back into the womb where we left off last show. We're going to go right back to the time of conception. Let's bring up our slide. You're going to see here a slide of some dividing cells. Back in our first few hours in the room, before Mom knew she was even pregnant, the 2 or 3 cells that would become our brain were in direct contact with the cells that would become our stomachs, our feet, our butts, our skeleton, everything. These cells were in energy contact for sure, but look here, they were in physical contact too. There's no difference. All the stuff in one cell is dumping back and forth into the other. So the way we think, the way we process information was being developed while our brain cells were in direct contact with the cells that would become our muscles, bones, organs, nerves, things like that. Fascinating. Let's come back here. It all took place at the very core of us. At the time, at the core was all there was of us. It took place when the inside of us was exactly the same as the outside of us. And all of our information was all being stamped in. The genetic fingerprint was being stamped in right there. All right, now let's fast forward from conception to adulthood. And we're going to go right back to another slide. See some old friends that we've seen before. Here we go. A few slides, there it is. A few shows back, we discussed how these guys here all began building themselves in response to pressures in the womb. So did our poor baby who fell on the bike, by the way. But let's stick with these guys. You see, these folks here have all built themselves quite differently, haven't they? But their construction project of themselves, it didn't start when they were in college. It didn't start in their childhood, or even when they were born, or even when mom was 7 months pregnant. It started long before that. Right after conception, right in the womb. All right, let's come back here and we'll review a couple of other folks that we looked at. Remember, we saw a rigid person, a deflated person, a depressed person, an anxious person, an angry person, a happy person. All of these people all built quite differently out of identical things. So, built out of identical atoms, but built out of very diverse cells. It all depends on how you want to look at it. And that brings us back to cells. So these cells, as you recall, they pulse and divide. They have walls that can be thick or thin. Our cells decide whether to collapse under pressure or push back. But wait a minute. That's what these whole people that we were just looking at, our cast of body types, that's exactly what we were doing. So our emotional structures are decided at the cellular level. We don't do it, cells do it. But cells don't have brains. How could that be? Hang on. That brings us back to the womb again. So here we are within a few hours after conception in the womb. That original zygote that has formed us is just a little amorphous clump of cells. It's, remember that cell division slide? Within a week or so, that little patch of shapeless goo now all of a sudden begins to form the first thing in us that has any shape at all. It's something called the embryonic disc. Now don't let these terms throw you off. I'm going to throw a couple of terms at you, but remember they're just words. Scientists like to use big words because they think it makes them sound smarter. So we won't get stuck in them at all. By week 3, what happens is that embryonic disc has now spun out into 3 more layers. We're separating. Identical something spinning off, huh? It creates an outside layer, an inside layer, and a middle layer. We call them the germ layers. Germ like wheat germ, not like an invader. Germ meaning core. Everything in our body now, everything in your body and mine, came from one of those 3 layers. Scientists call those 3 layers ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. Don't let the terms throw you. It just means outside layer, inside layer, and middle layer. That's all. All right, so there we are in the womb. We've just come together. The union of a loving mother and a loving father. At least hopefully so. And from these 2 separate entities has come unity. But not for long, because already, minutes after our conception, we've already developed an insatiable desire to separate, to individuate. And so right away, our cells began doing just that. These cells, they start to push and pull. They start to pulse and divide. They start to expand and give in. They form pouches and bags and spaces. All the things we create and all the things we collapse. They start building holes. We talked about atoms starting out as just big bags of nothing, and now we're creating big bags of nothing again. They start creating cavities. A thoracic cavity, that's our chest, and an abdominal cavity. What's a cavity? Well, it's a hole. It's a nothing. Our body desires to create nothingness. It longs to separate, create space, to expand. We even say things like, I need my space, respect my space. We look for it. But those external forces are always around, and they like to compress things. They like to pull things down. Sometimes they like to pull things apart. And so if we fight them, they will pull us down and pull us apart, but only if we fight them. But let's not digress. Let's stay here in the womb. Positively here in the womb, We are at the beginning of a wonderful life. We are beginning a life of growth and expansion. And we're specializing. We're developing arms that know they're not legs, eyes that aren't trying to hear. We've got things going where they ought to go. But negatively, we're doing something else. We are inaugurating the kingdom of self, the kingdom of me. We are defining myself as not you. And by the way, I come first. All of that is going on in our intellect. Our intellect orchestrates and monitors the whole project, the whole process. All right, that brings us to the body intellect. So, from time immemorial, smart scientists, they've studied the human brain. They've wanted to understand it. It's a good thing to understand, huh? They've wanted to understand intelligence, intellect, reason, thought, memory, recall, all those things that you and I were brought up believing were brain functions. It wasn't until the late 20th century, however, that they began to actually isolate the compounds, the nerve endings, the gizmos and the wires and the bells and the whistles that actually do these things, that actually give us these qualities. Well, good for them. It's an accomplishment to do that. And the late 70s were not very long ago. At that time, some even smarter scientists began to suspect and postulate the existence of something that they started calling receptor sites. And they believed that the interaction between these receptor sites and some things called neurotransmitters, remember these are just words, don't let them throw you, that something in that interaction provided a physiological basis for emotion, feeling, spirit, things like that, and intellect. So it was the physical basis for non-physical things, the physical understanding of invisible internal forces. It wasn't until the 70s that these things were proven, later in the 70s. And all of these brain functions just began to be understood. But do you know what else they found? They found that those receptor sites and those neurotransmitters, all those things, they weren't in your brain, they were everywhere. They were in every cell of your body. And that was revolutionary, because you know what it means? It means your toenails think, and your bones have reason, and your muscles have logic, and your nerves have thought processes. Everything has as much intellect as everything. All of these things that we always attributed to brain functions, they're everywhere. They permeate every single atom of you. How? Well, remember our slide? They were stamped out of the same mold when the layers separated in the first place. And now we're starting to see how. This was all so new and so revolutionary, except for the fact that old yogis and mystics knew it thousands of years ago. What else is permeating you that has a physical manifestation? Well, try these out. Love, peace, loyalty, anger, happiness, depression. How many of those things do you get to a pound? You can't see them. They're invisible, but they're there. They're right in there. Let's bring up our slide of dividing cells again, and you'll see how everything in one place is going to another place. You see that? It's all nothing. It's all wholes, energy, spirit, invisible things that are very real. All permeating those identical bags of nothing that make up 99.999% of you. And they're all building you right now. All right, let's come back up here. That body intellect. It's that simple. That body intellect is everything. But, as we're seeing, it's nothing. So, it's all very weighty, huh? What does it mean? What does it mean in our day-to-day lives? Well, it means something big. It means that once upon a time, our brain was connected to our stomach. And so some people, when they get really, really nervous, or when they really mess something up, they get nauseous. It means our brain was once connected to our intestines. And so some people, when they get under great, great stress, they get diarrhea. It means that our brain was once connected to our hearts. And so some people, when we get anxious, we get panic attacks, we get chest pains, we get shortness of breath, and breath is life. Oh my goodness. In some of us, that brain was connected to breast tissue that wouldn't even appear on the scene till 12 years after they were born. And And yet it's there, it's latent in the derm layers. And so one day after a lack of sacrifice, doctors start finding tumors and lumps. In others of us, that brain was connected to the prostate. And after years of getting along with the boss and macho pressure and sexual frustrations, that prostate swells up to the size of a rutabaga, and those guys can't sleep for more than 2 hours at a time without having to get up to go to the bathroom. It's like bubbles in the bottom of a glass of soda. They're nothing. They're invisible nothings that get stuck in a very real matrix. They're nothing. But as long as they're trapped there, there's something. And there's something big. That's what that body intellect means. So how can we live like that? That's not a very good story, is it? How can we be that unhealthy and that unhappy for so long? Well, so many of us do live like that. And so many of us are that way. We just accept it because we're unaware, and because we're unaware, we think that it's random. We think that it's chance. It comes to us from the outside. It's all we get. But it's not from the outside. These things are manifestations of our thought. They're manifestations of our internal forces. Our brain is clever, and it knows how to look tough. It knows how to appear tough. So, where do those things manifest? They manifest in our weak links, in those Achilles heels we talked about in previous shows. And when they do, it wreaks havoc on our bodies. It wreaks havoc on those internal forces. And that combines with those external forces. And we fall down. And we fall apart. But you did it to yourself. That's the important thing. There's no one else to blame. And that's not bad news. Because if you broke yourself, you can fix yourself. Let's take that back to our baby in the womb. Remember that guy? His mother wasn't abusive, and yet he grows up feeling like he was abused. And nobody can figure him out. You know why? Because they weren't there. But his body intellect was. And his body intellect understands. If we can just take that poor fellow and get him in touch with his body intellect, he can heal. He can heal from everything. All the stuff that's mysterious to the outside world, it's all right there inside of him. And so there's hope for our friend. What does that have to do with you? What does it have to do with me? Well, like our friend, most of us are out of touch with our body intellect. And so all we have to do is get in touch with it. How do we do that? How do we get out of that watch and copy mode? Well, awareness is what breaks the chain, and awareness is what returns us to our unified memory. To summon the power of the body intellect, we have to get in touch with it. We have to get in peace, sit down, shut up, meditate, and then we'll find it. It's right in here. And that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. I wish you peace and positive energy and a healthy life in Energy Contact.
Ain't gonna complain. I'm gonna drive away.